The new Talk Radio 1210, WPHT.
Hey, welcome in, everyone. Good Friday morning. Dom Giordano with you. One of the guys who has rapidly advanced into the center of the debate, without a doubt, in the new Congress is our own Senator Pat Toomey. He's with me here on the Dom Giordano program. Senator, welcome in. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, good morning, Dom. Thanks for having me.
Well, here's the opening. I'll give you an easy question. What the heck are you guys going to do about oil prices? Give me a sense, Pat, of what's being discussed in there in the Senate around oil, gas prices.
Well, I can tell you what I've been talking about with many of my colleagues is when in the world are we going to start developing the resources we have domestically? This is just it's just ongoing insanity, Dom, that we choose not to develop tremendous oil reserves that we have in Alaska, both ANWR and not ANWR, off the outer continental shelf. We have tremendous reserves of oil. We could be developing it. We could be using it. You know, 10 years ago, we heard people saying, oh, there's no point in doing that because it wouldn't be available for 10 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, hello.
Exactly.
It'd be available today.
Is that getting traction?
No reason not to start.
Is that getting traction that, do you hear from your constituents that they get it, that we're connecting that dot versus thinking, it's just some kind of billionaire oilman? That's what the conspiracy theorists have out there. Yeah.
I don't think so. I think Pennsylvania voters are plenty smart enough to know that if there's more supply, and it's domestic supply, that means lower cost and less reliance on foreign oil. Last night we saw flare-ups in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the only country that has significant swing production. There's a little bit in Kuwait, but really the only one that could replace significant volume of oil should there be a disruption is Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia itself, of course, is the biggest exporter by far. If there's a problem in Saudi Arabia, and who knows how far this unrest in the Middle East spreads, then we've got very serious problems. It's absolutely unforgivable that we have chosen not to develop our own oil resources.
Well, is there anything going on in the Senate then to push back against that, or is this more an election year issue that will happen?
No, Dom, we've got to try in the Senate to force votes on this because the Democratic leadership in the Senate will not go there. They do not want to expand domestic production, but many individual Democratic senators know that we need to do it. So what we need to do, and I hate to I don't mean to bog down in process and technicalities, but what we need to do on the Senate floor is find opportunities to force a vote, even though Harry Reid doesn't want one, because I think we could win some. I'm not sure. We won't know until we try, but we've got to try because we can't just sit by idly and allow gas prices to go through the roof.
Now, I'm looking at a local headline, Senator Toomey. Senator Toomey will block legislation unrelated to spending cuts, reducing debt. In other words, holding up the business of the Senate is being threatened until we address meaningful spending cuts. Talk about that. Well, what's being proposed there?
Well, we're in the process of running a $1.6 trillion deficit this year. The month of February, the federal government ran the biggest deficit in the history of the Republic. By all accounts, we are racking up so much debt that it's a very serious threat to our economic future, Dom. And so I'm just saying we got to cut some spending here. And instead, the Democratic majority in the Senate wants to move on and talk about a patent reform bill, which we did last week, and a small business reauthorization bill, which they want to do next week. And meanwhile, we haven't even finished funding the government for the remainder of this year. There has been no Senate budget put on the floor. There has been no discussion about the process reform that we need to get spending under control. They just want us to raise the debt limit and just keep borrowing ever more. And my point is, hey, the most urgent thing we've got right now is getting our fiscal house in order. So let's not go pursuing all kinds of other legislation, even if it might have merit. Let's just put that on hold until we've sorted out our spending mess.
Well, how does this play out then, too, Senator, with the debt ceiling and that vote coming up? Is this going to be pushed off forever, do you think? What are you hearing? What's your sense of that?
Well, I don't think I don't think anybody knows, Dom. But the president hasn't provided any leadership at all. He's proposed a budget that just keeps growing government, increasing spending, racking up ever more debt. That's an abrogation of his responsibility to lead, in my opinion. So we Republicans are going to have to offer a budget alternative. We voted for a spending bill that cuts spending by $61 billion through the remainder of the fiscal year. Haven't been able to get that passed, and so instead we've been doing these little 2-week bills. And meanwhile, because we're borrowing so much money every day, literally $4 billion a day, Dom. Every day that goes by, another $4 billion is what we're borrowing just to keep the government afloat. And we're about to crash into the debt limit, and my point is, we've got to stop this. You can't just continue this way. This is what we've seen what happens to other countries that go down this road. It never ends well. So let's have the reforms. Now, I'd like to see a balanced budget amendment that would force us to live within our means and stop spending money we don't have. I'd be open to statutory spending limits that put a cap on how much the government can spend and would automatically make cuts if we exceeded that cap. I'm open to these things, but we're not even having a discussion about this because Harry Reid and company want to move on and talk about other things and just continue spending as usual.
The pressure or the energy, whichever way you look at it, is coming from the states, and I'm sure when you mention that $4 billion thing, it's on my mind. We've been talking with the Corbett people this week, Senator, had them on around the budget. The states have to get their house in order, and they're doing it. And Pennsylvania looks to be an exemplar of this.
Well, I think you got to give Governor Corbett a lot of credit. You know, he said he was going to cut spending. He said he was not going to raise taxes. He said he was going to pursue policies that'd be strong for the economy and get our spending under control. And that's what he's doing. I give him credit.
Well, let's look at New York Times today. Senator has a piece too on Lisa Murkowski talking about tough votes. Listeners know that I see Head Start is what they're talking about. It's a decent program, but it's overblown. It doesn't really have long-lasting impact. And they're talking about she voted to cut that. How about you? Give us an idea of something like Head Start. Are you in favor of even looking at a program like that?
Dom, I think we have to, virtually everything has to be on the table. I mean, we've got men and women in harm's way. I'm not going to support cutting funding for the men and women in Afghanistan and Iraq, for instance. People who are current retirees receiving Social Security, they've got to get the benefits that they were promised. So there are a few exceptions, but there are very few exceptions. And I'll tell you, the defense budget overall in its entirety has to be on the table. Congress has forced the Pentagon to buy weapon systems that the Pentagon doesn't want. That's ridiculous. We've got to cut that sort of thing. And there are lots of programs that, I understand the purpose is good. You'd like to fund them when times were good. But when we are racking up an unprecedented debt and we are endangering our own the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mullen, said the biggest threat to America's security right now is the nation's debt. So I believe that's true.
Connect the dots for us, would you, Senator? How does that threaten our very national security?
Because we can't maintain a strong military if we don't have the financial resources to do it. And we are on a path right now where just interest on our debt is going to consume a huge portion of all of our tax revenue. There won't be enough money left over to maintain the world's first-rate military. There just won't be the resources to do it.
How do Republicans, do you see it as a challenge? I mentioned Head Start, which I think the cuts were certainly justified given everything that's out there. How do we articulate that? Is it, as you said, to say, hey, we're going to look at the military too. Just because we're Republicans, they're not a sacred cow. They have some things in there that may have to be pruned also.
Well, and that's one, right? The cuts have to be broad. But there's two more important things, I think, Dom, that we've got to remember. Number one, if you cut government spending, you're going to have stronger economic growth. And let me say it again. If we cut government spending, we will have stronger economic growth. We will have more resources in the private sector. We will have more business being created. We'll have more jobs being created, more businesses expanding. So, first of all, who isn't in favor of stronger economic growth and more job creation? I'm in favor of it. Cutting government spending helps us get there. Second thing that we should remember is these programs that we're talking about cutting, many of them have had huge increases in the last few years. And we're just talking about bringing them back to the level they were at just a couple of years ago. That's not unreasonable, Dom.
No, I think that's the line that strikes people as reasonable. We're not decimating the program. We're bringing it back to the level of spending that was just from a couple of years ago. Let me ask you, how does Senator Pat Toomey deal with callers that I get and others? And I wanted to hear from someone right there in the catbird seat to say, all right, well, what about these oil company subsidies? Talk about your record on that and talk about why some are needed or not. What are they about?
I'm not in favor of the U.S. government subsidizing any corporations.
Okay.
I don't think the government should be in the business of doing business. We shouldn't have bailed out the car companies. We shouldn't have bailed out the banks. We shouldn't be subsidizing. We shouldn't be paying for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. We shouldn't be paying for NPR. We shouldn't be doing this. So I'm opposed to it. I think we should be treating business equally. The government shouldn't be picking the winners and losers. Let the marketplace decide which businesses will succeed and which will fail.
Do you see any traction now with the latest revelations out there, both Planned Parenthood and NPR, that the Senate even would consider these cuts that are being proposed?
The Senate will consider it. I'm afraid with the current composition of the Senate, they will continue to fund Planned Parenthood. I'm not sure about NPR. When you have the leadership of NPR acknowledging that they don't need government money and acknowledging that they're an extremely liberal organization, and they're quite happy to admit that privately, I think it's pretty indefensible that we're forcing taxpayers to subsidize it.
Great work, Senator Toomey. Thank you so much for the time again, too. Thanks for the insight in what's actually going on.
All right. Thanks for having me, Dom.
You are welcome, Senator.